Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. So, I have a treat for you. I've been mentioning, I'm only at one video a month. Now I want to change that. I want to at least try to start making weekly videos, probably over the weekend. So instead of doing my monthly reading reports, I want to move to weekly reading reports and start talking about kind of things as I read them. And also I want to mix in kind of more comics and short stories and talk about this. So talk about that. So if I don't finish a novel, at least I have something to talk about. I kind of want to kill two birds with one stone. I also want to give for the rest of July, we're basically done with the first week of July, but I want to kind of outline my reading for the rest of the month, and I want to cover several BookTube events, including BookTrek, Jane Austen July, Rocket Summer, and then, in my notes, what is it? Private Eye in July. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about what I've read this week. So the first thing, and this is something that I'm currently reading. I've read the first 9 issues, I think all of Action Comics. I'm reading DC's Finest, Superman, the first superhero, and I've read the first 9 issues of Action Comics. So this is, of course, Golden Age Superman. I'm enjoying it. The lower stakes are a lot of fun. It's kind of a change of pace if you're used to reading kind of more modern Superman. And, of course, the character is not kind of fully fledged yet. They haven't quite written all his powers yet. And that's not really surprising to me. What I find striking is Lois Lane really treats Clark Kent like a jerk. Of course, she likes Superman. She is in love with Superman, even in these early issues. But she is very, very mean to Clark. And I'm excited to see kind of this covers 1938 to 1940. I'm kind of excited to see how quickly Lois Lane changes. Is she going to stay like this hostile to Clark, in this entire volume? In the future, I also want to compare Golden Age Superman to Silver Age Superman. I'm getting the impression that Silver Age Superman is really when the Superman character, kind of as we know him today, kind of formed. So I have a book, Superman in the 60s. So at some point soon after I finish this, I'll read Superman in the 60s. But yeah, I want to continue just reading more comics and Superman going forward. Another book that I'm still currently reading, and this is something I am reading out loud. Last month I read The Hobbit out loud, and now I've moved on to the Odyssey, of course by Homer, and translated by Robert Fagles. I'm not very far into this, and I'm actually not even reading this copy. I'm reading it on my Kindle. I've only read the first 2 books. Last year I read the Iliad, also translated by the Robert Fagles translation. I enjoyed it a lot. And I want to just continue that by reading the Odyssey. So I know that there's the Christopher Nolan movie coming out, so that was a good reminder, like, hey, don't forget to read this year. So far, I haven't really gotten into the thick of it yet. I've only read the first 2 books. I'm excited for the story to kind of shift from Telemachus to Odysseus. So I'm not too deep into it, but this is a great book. It's written in verse, so of course it's great to be read out loud. It should be read out loud, and you should slow down when you read it. So I'm going to enjoy just kind of slowly going through this. Next up, I'll tell you a book that I did finish. Well, not a book, but a short story. And it is, if we can go back. So I mentioned last month, I'm currently reading through the Jack Vance Treasury, edited by Terry Dowling and Jonathan Strahan. And something I'm going through slowly. I'm trying to just fit in a short story or novella in between the novels that I'm reading. And the book that I finished this week, or I guess it's a short story, or maybe a novelette, maybe a novella, however you classified it, was The Gift of Gab by Jack Vance. And while not my favorite story in this collection so far, nothing has topped Dragon Masters. The Gift of Gab was good. It's about a group of kind of off-world workers. They work on this kind of ocean planet, and they discover that there's like these squid-like alien beings, animals, that they consider them animals, are kind of causing some problems on their rig, and they realize that these creatures might be a little bit more intelligent, and maybe they deserve, maybe we shouldn't be harvesting them for resources. So it was really good, and it was about them kind of trying to communicate, and it almost reminded me a little bit of Arrival. Of course, Arrival gets very kind of weird with the time stuff. Nothing like that here, but it is about trying to communicate, and how do we communicate with something. And it's also, animals that are intelligent. What kind of rights they have? What kind of morality should we? Should there be moral considerations with how we treat these animals, especially if the more than intelligent that they are. So I really liked it. That was The Gift of Gab. Next up, this is a book that I'm still reading. This is The Moon Pool by Merritt, or Abraham Merritt. And this is kind of knocking two birds with one stone. So Michael K. Vaughan, who created Rocket Summer, he also... So this is my first book for week 1 of Rocket Summer. This was written in 1919. But it's also a book that Michael K. Vaughan selected for his for Rodder's Cheapold Book Club. So knocking two birds with one stone out. I would say I like it, but it's more that I appreciate it more than I really like it. It's interesting seeing, something written in 1919 in the pulp era, when you have this question: is this sci-fi or is it fantasy? And where's the line? And in this era, sci-fi and fantasy really are the same genre. In fact, Michael K. Vaughan, I think even earlier today, he released a video talking about how, yes, there is a difference between sci-fi and fantasy. I still personally consider, I consider sci-fi and fantasy distinct, and today especially, they can be very distinct, but they still fit under this kind of broader, in my opinion, this broader SFF or sci-fi fantasy, or you could even call it just a broader fantasy umbrella genre. I think Michael in his video mentions it's kind of just fantastic fiction, and they both sci-fi and fantasy fall under that. So this book, though, as I'm reading it, yes, there are kind of fantasy. I think it's a science fiction book with fantasy elements. I think it is firmly science fiction. Everything has, if it's not explained to you, it's implied that, hey, nothing is magic here. Some of the stuff seems like magic. In fact, there's a sentence where a character explicitly says this. This is all basically science-based. Another cool thing that Abraham Merritt does is the main character, Dr. Goodwin, he will kind of describe certain technologies that they come across. It's to describe the story. It's basically a lost world kind of. There's an underground civilization, and they're technologically more advanced. And he always mentions, he kind of goes into detail sometimes with how he thinks their technology works. And occasionally in the novel, there was an instance of like editors coming in and redacting how this technology works because they don't want like the Russians to gain, to get this technology. And keep in mind, this book was written in 1919. This is after World War I, after the Russian Revolution. There is a Russian character too, so kind of this anti-communist sentiment kind of keeps coming up. So, like I said, I think this book's maybe a little bit too long. I am kind of slowly going through it, but I am appreciating it, and I'm glad that I'm reading it. So that's it for my weekly reading report. So now I want to talk about some 4 different BookTube events that I want to try to participate in. So I'm going to give you, I'm calling it a TBR in the title here, but really this is, especially for Rocket Summer, this is a list of kind of books that I thought about when coming up with my actual TBR. So many of these books, there's no way I'm going to get to these things. This is more of just kind of a long-term TBR that I've come up with thanks to these BookTube events. First, let's go kind of the shortest one first. So Jane Austen, July. So last year I read Pride and Prejudice for the first time, and then I read Emma. Pride and Prejudice I really liked. I enjoyed it a lot. Emma, once again, like the Moon Pool, I'm glad that I read it. I appreciate the book, but I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as Pride and Prejudice. I kind of did have to force myself a little bit to finish it. So for this month, I want to read, and again, those are the only Jane Austen books I've read. I want to read Northanger Abbey. And the reason I'm picking this one and not, say, Mansfield Park or Sense and Sensibility is because this one I've heard is a little bit lighter. It's a lot of fun. I've heard there's kind of this gothic theme, I think. And it's not as thick as, say, Mansfield Park. So this is the one that I want to pick out. And I might be starting this actually very soon. I might actually start this next after I finish the Moon Pool. So that's Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And that's it for Jane Austen July. I'm not planning on doing any of the other prompts. But I will say, if I do one more prompt, maybe it'll be watch a Jane Austen movie. I'm not really planning on it, but if I were to pick another prompt, it would be that one. Let's go to the next kind of, for me, it will be a smaller event, Private Eye in July. I have two books kind of picked out. And this first one is something that's kind of been on I've been aware of it for a while now, and I just haven't gotten to it. It is Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest. It's about his Continental op character. This has been on my shelf for, well, not for too long, but it's been kind of on my long-term TBR for some time. I don't think that I'm actually going to read this month. I have too many other, with BookTrek, Jane Austen July, and Rocket Somewhere. Those are kind of taking the priority. If I were able to fit in a novel, it would be this one, Red Harvest. Probably. I am a mood reader, so when I say it's going to be this one, there's a possibility I could pick something else. But what I'm actually going to read, and this has been on my shelf actually a little bit longer, is also Dashiell Hammett, and it's a short story collection with the Continental short stories. So what I'm probably going to do is I'll probably just read the first story in this collection, which is, I think, the 10th. Yeah, the 10th clue. And I think that might be it. I do want to read more kind of mystery fiction, private eye fiction. There's also some, wouldn't count for this event, but there's also some police procedurals that I kind of have on my long-term TBR list. So for this event, I'm probably just going to read at least one story from this collection. And now we can move on to BookTrek. So I've mentioned in the past that I have a lot of Star Trek books. I love collecting Star Trek books. I have when I go out to bookstores, I have a spreadsheet with all the Star Trek books that I have, so I don't get duplicates. I just like collecting them. They're a lot of fun to get. It's like a cheap. They're a cheap series of books to collect. They're very, very inexpensive. So the first two books on this list are both Imzadi by Peter David and Strangers from the Sky by Margaret Wander Bonanno. I think that's how you know me. I'm bad with names. Both of these books, Brandy from the Book Collectic mentioned that she was probably going to start a group read. Now, I've never participated in a group read before. We'll see if I maybe can join in. But I have my sights set on these. This book, I've heard interesting things about it. I've heard that if there's maybe one Star Trek book that you could read without knowing a lot about Star Trek, it might be this one. And then Imzadi by Peter David. Peter David just passed away this year, so a lot of people on BookTrek, I think, are focusing on Peter David. I have read, I can't remember the title. I have read, it was co-written by Peter David and a couple other authors. It was an original series novel. I can't remember the name. But this is a pretty popular Star Trek novel, Imzadi. It's actually, I think, it might have been the first Star Trek novel I ever bought. So I actually DNF'd it many, many years ago. Not that it was bad. It was just earlier, a few years ago, I would kind of, my reading habit would kind of fluctuate. So I'm excited to read that as well and finally finish it. Two other books that I have my sights set on. And again, with Star Trek, just keep in mind, this list could just go out the window tomorrow. But I do want to read more Bantam books. And the next Bantam era book that I want to read is Planet of Judgement by Joe Haldeman. Haldeman? I think that's how you say it. Joe Haldeman, of course, very popular science fiction author. I have read, I've read at least the first two Forever War books. The Forever War is amazing. I don't know if I ever read the third one. I can't remember. But I want to see what he can do with Star Trek. The Bantam books don't have the best reputation, but I have heard some people give this some praise. I mean, Joe Haldeman's a good author, so I expect I'm kind of expecting some good things from this. I'd like to read more Bantam books, but I think this will be the first one when I go back to Bantam. And then lastly, I have a Diane Duane book. This is a Diane Duane TNG book called Dark Mirror. This is, of course, it's not a numbered book, but it's from the numbered pocketbooks era. And yeah, I like the Mirror Universe. It's interesting that TNG never had a Mirror Universe episode. But so anyway, I'm excited to see what Diane Duane does with kind of a mirror universe if it were to happen in TNG. Also, I heard in an interview that she does some interesting things with Reginald Barclay. And this was in an interview with Diane Duane herself, and she mentions that character as I wanted to do something with that character. So I don't know what she does with him. I think he's still kind of awkward and weird. He's still the same guy, just this Dark Mirror Universe version of him. So I'm really excited to read this at some point. And I also, just as a format thing, so I mentioned I'm nowadays I kind of prefer reading on my Kindle. I'll still read paperbacks, but I have a few hardcover Star Trek books, and I just want to read one in hardcover. So I have this one in hardcover. So that's it for my BookTrek list. Again, I have so many Star Trek books. I'm sure something else will pop up that I get a hankering to read. The last event that I want to talk about is, of course, Rocket Summer. Again, this book, or this list is, I'm going to go through the weeks. Of course, technically, I guess we're still in week 1, and I'm still working on my first book. And again, that is The Moon Pool by Abraham Merritt. But I want to go through other books that if I were able to read like one book a day, like some people can, I want to mention some authors and books. So, and keep in mind, I'm not going to read these books. There's no way I'm going to get to them. There is a chance, though, that I may say screw it to the other decades and just stick with 1930s and earlier. So maybe that might happen. I don't know. But if I were able to read one book a day, I would also read A Princess of Mars. And more than just A Princess of Mars, I'm really talking about the Barsoom series as a whole. And also, more than just the Barsoom series, I want to read just Edgar Rice Burroughs in general, Tarzan, his other sci-fi series. I've never read Edgar Rice Burroughs before. I know this is a big influence on something like Star Wars, so I've been wanting to actually read Edgar Rice Burroughs for a while. Again, probably not going to read him this month, but just for long term, I do want to dive into the Barsoom series. Another series that I want to try, at least the first book. Well, there's some debate about what you should read first. In general, if you read this series, and it's the Lensman series by E.E. Doc Smith, I've heard that you should stick with Galactic Patrol. Now, this is a case. This book as a novel was published in 1950, but the stories were first published in 1937. So I'm counting this under the 30s. So this is another author, very influential for space opera, both Star Trek, Star Wars. And it's an author that I want to check out, at least the first novel in the series, which I'm saying is not Triplanetary. I've heard, no, stick with Galactic Patrol. I don't have pictures of these, but other authors, I just want to mention H.G. Wells, in particular, War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. War of the Worlds would be a reread. I think I read it in high school. Or I know where I read it. I think it was in high school. And then The Time Machine. I don't think I've actually read that before, but I do remember my parents used to get me, when I was a little kid, a series called Great Illustrated Classics. If you're my age, I'm in my mid-30s. If you're my age, I'm sure you remember that series of kind of children's versions of classic literature. And the one that I remember was The Time Machine and Frankenstein. So I'm excited to actually read the true original adult version. Another author, and I don't have any work in particular picked out, but Jules Verne. I've never read Jules Verne. I have everything of his on my Kindle, including his novels that are still in French and untranslated into English. So I have everything by him. And then lastly, Olaf Stapledon. This is an author that also you could pick something from the 1940s. But the two novels I kind of have, again, I don't have pictures of them, but Last and First Men, or maybe Star Maker, both of those written in the 30s. So let's move on to the 1940s. Here they are. Brief pause there. Listen, a little dead air never killed anyone. Now, I've picked 2 novels here. I don't have many novels from the 40s, sci-fi novels from the 40s. And I will admit that this author, I'll just show it. It's Robert Heinlein, both Rocket Ship Galileo as well as Space Cadet. Both of these, for this author, I'm more excited actually to read his more famous novels, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Strangers from a Strange Land. Both, if I'm not mistaken, both from the 60s. But if I had to pick something from the 1940s, it would be one of these books. Now, week 2 is coming up, so we should be moving over to the 40s. I do want to read Jane Austen. I do want to read Star Trek. These might get cut. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit these in. But if I had unlimited time, I would pick one of these 2 for the 1940s. Next up, 1950s. And this book is really, I'm bringing it up, again, more for the author, but it's my first book by him will probably be this one. And it is The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. I also want to eventually get to the Foundation, or at least Foundation, if not the Foundation series. But I saw a video created by the Outlaw Bookseller. And he mentioned he had a guide that he posted for how to get into Foundation, and as Isaac Asimov, I think, in general. And he recommends actually reading The Caves of Steel first. I have Foundation. I also have iRobot, but I think with Asimov, this might be my first one. Also, we're going to read a book that I would like to get to, assuming I don't also cut the 1950s. And this is the one, if I were to pick one, it's actually probably going to be this one. It's Earthlight by Arthur C. Clarke. The reason I picked this was because my dad actually my parents stopped by for a visit. And we were talking about science fiction novels, and he mentioned that when he was in high school, he read this and he really liked it. And then my latest trip to the bookstore, I happened to find just a really nice used copy. It's not very long, so I should be able to fit this in. But for the 1950s, I think it's probably going to be this one. Lastly, even though I don't think I'm going to be able to read this, this is an author that I read last month. This is Philip K. Dick, and it's Time Out of Joint. I've heard if you're new to Philip K. Dick, this is a really good place to start. I've, of course, already read, I mentioned in my last video, that 4-novel collection. Last month I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, as well as Ubik? Electric Sheep was amazing. That was great. Ubik was also a lot of fun. I've heard this is a really good starting place if you're new to Philip K. Dick. So though I'm probably not going to read it this month, I mean, who knows? At some point soon, I do want to read more from Philip K. Dick. And lastly, the 1960s. So I have 2 on my list here. The first one is, I mentioned earlier, I'm reading the Jack Vance Treasury, but I also want to read a novel by Jack Vance. So this is something I received recently for my birthday. This is Imferio, I think is how it's pronounced, by Jack Vance. I haven't even read the back. Don't know too much about it, but I know I'm liking this author. I don't know if Jack Vance is for everyone, but I mentioned in my last video, I feel like his world building, he can do a lot in a small amount of pages as far as world building goes. I mean, Frank Herbert, my copy of Dune is 800 pages, and I feel like Jack Vance, when I read The Dragon Master, I felt like, wow, this is the same amount of world building as Dune, but it's only in 100 plus pages. So I'm really impressed by this author, and I'm excited to read something a little bit longer by him. And this is not that long itself. And then lastly, the last book. I might, if I don't read Time Out of Joint, maybe I'll pick this. This is another Philip K. Dick novel. This is Martian Time Slip. And the reason this is on my radar is also, once again, because of the Outlaw Bookseller. If you like science fiction and kind of... if you like fantasy too, but mostly science fiction, the Outlaw Bookseller is a really great resource. He focuses generally more on new wave sci-fi, as he calls it SF. He doesn't like to call it sci-fi. So after Rocket Summer, now Rocket Summer is kind of focusing on pre-New Wave. But once we finish Rocket Summer, if you wanted to get some ideas on what to read as far as New Wave and stuff that's a little bit later, definitely check out his channel. It's a really great resource. But yeah, this is Martian Time Slip, and the reason I want to check it out is because the ending is supposed to be he says, I think this is a book, he said, this ending blew his mind. The Outlet bookseller said this. He also said that at the end there is what appears to maybe be typos or some formatting errors, but they're not. It's part of the story. So I'm really excited to learn what kind of formatting and formatting things that Philip K. Dick does. I imagine it's going to be reality breaking. But yeah, I love this author, Philip K. Dick. I've only read 4 novels by him, but I want to read a lot more because he's really, really good. But that's it for Rocket Summer. Once again, I'm not going to read all those books. This is really just, I was using Rocket Summer to create a longer TBR for my future science fiction reading. And then moving forward, so obviously I want to try to read as much of that list as I can. But I also, kind of with this, there's some other authors, kind of fantasy and pulp fantasy authors. For example, Michael Moorcock, C.L. Moore, and there's even more science fiction authors who I didn't even mention that I want to get to. So for the rest of the year, I think there's going to be a lot of science fiction and a lot of fantasy, and fantasy of kind of the shorter, more episodic variety, instead of kind of big, like, Wheel of Time, never-ending, bloated epics. Speaking of Wheel of Time, I do want to finish that one day. Anyway, let me cut it off there, but that's all for now. Thank you.